Hi, Grandpa. After my last transmission, I noticed you're starting to look for other voices, people from your own time, to help you make sense of the messages I'm sending. I'm seriously trying my best to make my transmissions as accessible as possible for someone living 100 years ago. But sometimes it's hard to remember every concept and every technology you didn't know back then. So honestly, I love the idea of you reaching out to brilliant minds from your time to help fully grasp what I'm trying to share. Look for someone called Seb Bunney. If there's someone from your time who really grasped the root of the health crisis, even without being a doctor, it was him. He didn't study medicine, he studied money. But what he uncovered was something we now teach in every health curriculum. Money, trust, and collaboration are the basis of health. Seb wrote The Hidden Cost of Money, and in it, he showed how economic systems that decay trust also decay the human psyche. Inflation, short-term thinking, hustle culture. They weren't just policy outcomes. They were public health disasters. Because when you can't plan for the future, your nervous system never rests. And when your money lies, your whole life gets distorted. He understood what we now live. You can't build personal sovereignty on economic quicksand. That's why I think he would be a great fit to understand and discuss today's message. Hey, Grandpa, I caught a cold last week. Fever, aches, the whole cycle. First time I've been sick in 10 years. At first I thought it was just exhaustion, maybe a change in weather. But after sitting with it, I realized what triggered it. Riven leaving for the Mars Citadel. We've been separated before, but this time it hit different. Like my body was finally processing the grief I hadn't let myself feel. The fever wasn't a failure. It was a message. And that's what brought me back to a memory I hadn't visited in years. I was 13 the first time I accessed the 2025 medical archives. You would have thought it was a sci-fi horror reel. Pages and pages of normalized illness, chronic inflammation, hormonal collapse, kids on meds by age 9. Not just emergency care, Grandpa, baselines. And it wasn't treated as a crisis. It was just life. I remember seeing a data card that said 60% of adults are on long-term medication, and no one blinked. We didn't cure humanity with tech alone. We cured it with truth. Here's what we did. We rewired the schools. From age 3, kids are taught to track their own signals. Physical, emotional, energetic. By 10, they know how to map unmet needs. By 12, they've practiced radical honesty communication. Naming the hard things without blame. Listening without retreat. We built a healthcare system that listens. AI didn't replace doctors. It ended the guesswork. Blood panels, gut scans, biofield readings, all parsed in real time. Personalized protocols, tuned to biochemistry. But the real shift? We don't just follow the data. We pause. We ask, does this resonate with my body? Intuition and analytics meet. That's medicine now. And underneath it all, Bitcoin, not as medicine, but as the foundation that made trust possible again. Considering money as the language of human trust and collaboration, you can't build health on a money that lies, that loses value over time. It distorted behavior, made people hustle, hoard, hide. How can a species thrive when their primary exchange system rewards anxiety? When Bitcoin anchored value in energy, truth, and time, people exhaled. Cooperation came back. And believe it or not, their nervous system could relax. An incredible shift. So yeah, Grandpa, today, illness is rare. Not because of miracle drugs, because we designed a world where health made sense. You know what it reminded me of, Grandpa? Radium. Back in the 1920s, people drank it, called it vitality water. Doctors prescribed it. Companies sold it. No one questioned it. It glowed, so they thought it must be life-giving. They even put it in toothpaste. But it was radioactive poison, and by the time the truth came out, jaws were rotting, bones were dissolving. That's what the 2025 pharmaceutical age looks like to us now. Not malicious, just tragically misaligned. We didn't erase sickness. We just stopped feeding it. I'm off to co-lead a session on inner signal mapping with the 8-year-olds. They've been working on describing how grief feels in the body, and honestly, they're better at it than most adults from your time. I'll send my next message after their mirroring round. Talk soon, Grandpa. Bye.
So, hey Seb, welcome, and thank you very much for your time.
Oh man, Patrick, I'm super excited for this conversation. When you reached out and you kind of just shared a kind of snippet as to your views for or vision for this podcast, I was just like in awe. I think it's incredible and it's really unique. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Cool, thank you very much. And yeah, my very smart granddaughter laid out about like 45 points where we could start a conversation. And she already knew a lot about you. But actually, like she said, you wrote a book about that topic, right? So the hidden cost of money. And could we start at the very beginning, how you draw like the line between those 2 points, like a monetary system that's not properly working, and health issues?
So it's such a big question. I would say, so a little bit about me first, because it will make a little more sense. I went down the rabbit hole of kind of coaching, mountain biking, absolutely loved it, and
Hmm.
realized pretty early on that when I was earning $15.75 as a mountain bike instructor, how was I ever going to be able to support a family? How was I ever going to be able to put a roof over our heads, to purchase a house? And that, on reflection, made me realize that our monetary system has a huge impact on our ability to pursue what it is that motivates us. And
Hmm.
so I ended up going down this rabbit hole of, okay, if I wasn't going to be a mountain bike instructor, what interests me? And I'd always had a deep fascination with the financial markets. There's always had a deep fascination with psychology. And so while I went down the rabbit hole of investing and trying to create passive income as a side hobby, I also went down the rabbit hole of trying to become a therapist, specifically what's called like a somatic therapist. So looking at how do we heal our body from the inside out through listening
Hmm.
to our somatic experience, which is our
Hmm.
feeling sense, as opposed to kind of cognitive behavioral approaches where we're talking about our experience. Now, what is fascinating about that is you start to recognize when you're going down this kind of somatic experience side of things that our ability to express emotions is so unbelievably important. So if our parents, when we were younger, impacted our ability to express certain emotions, let's say they said, you know what, I don't like anger or I don't like sadness, any of these so-called like heavy emotions. Well, what happens? Later in life, we start to develop things like anxiety and depression because when we're going through these states, when times are tough, we don't know how to express those emotions. Things
Hmm.
like depression is just the depressing of emotions. It's the depressing of emotions that we never learn how to express. We never learn how to express sadness. We never learn how to express depression. So when we start to face them as an adult, because we didn't express them as a child, it leads to all of these uncomfortable feelings and it can send us down this rabbit hole of looking for pharmaceuticals, antidepressants, because we're unfamiliar with these experiences. Now, what is fascinating is when I was writing The Hidden Cost of Money, I started to kind of piece together. I was like, you know what? I think, like language, money is just a medium of expression. It's how we express to the world what it is that we value. Instead of emotions
Yeah. Yeah.
expressing what it is that we're feeling, money is how we express to the world what we value. So if I walk into a grocery store and I see someone buying grass-fed beef and organic vegetables, and then I see someone else buying microwave meals and cigarettes, you can see what someone values by how they direct their money, how they
Yes.
spend their money. And so
Yeah.
I think the challenge we face, just like as an individual, if I am never taught how to express myself wholeheartedly, and it can lead to these symptoms like depression and anxiety later in life, when we have broken money, when we have things like inflation, so our purchasing power is diminishing, we can't spend our money where we see fit, or whether we see things like capital controls, where let's say I live in China and I want to go protect my family. I want to direct my energy towards protecting my family. So I want to invest my money to preserve my purchasing power to kind of create some form of financial stability for my family. Well, if the government puts capital controls in place so I cannot invest internationally, and then it's devaluing the currency, it's impeding my ability to protect my family. If I want to be able to go support myself and purchase nutritious food, but my purchasing power is diminishing, I can no longer do that. And so I would say that when money breaks down, when our purchasing power is diminishing, when we've got capital controls, when we have regulation in place that prevents us from spending our money when we see fit, we can no longer express ourselves monetarily how we want to. We cannot show up authentically. And so I would argue that a lot of the issues we face in society stem from a monetary system that doesn't allow us to express ourselves on a monetary level.
Okay. And I've one question, because you talked about depression and the correlation. Have you, and there is a connection to a monetary system, what I think. Have you heard of Dr. Blanton?
No.
It's like Radical Honesty is his book. Have you heard of that?
I think I've heard of the book.
Seriously, I guess it's the best book I've read in the past 5 years. And when you talked about depression, it came to my mind, and we will grab on that later on, probably. He says that not being honest, or being the opposite, lying, is the root cause of all the diseases he had treated in 30 years. And the idea is so brilliant. He said, when you grow up from the age like 1 to 7, you get like imprinted with how the world works.
Mm-hmm.
So, and by the age of 25, you have a pretty much clear picture how this all is connected, although you have no fucking clue, but at least you think you have. And then reality hits. Then you realize that the picture you have and reality are not congruent, right? So the normal behavior would be to say like, okay, I need to adapt my picture. But we're very bad with that, especially with beliefs we have, right? So he says like most of the people develop some kind of coping mechanism. And there are two things that are very interesting. Depression, he says, is actually you constantly are faced with a reality that is not fitting in your box you built so hard over 25 years. And you collapse. You just say like, okay, I can't stand it. It's just like, what the fuck is happening? And it's some kind of like error, you can say. And is it neurotic behavior? Yeah, right.
Yep.
Is actually the opposite. Because through your behavior, you're trying to control reality to make it fit into your box. And he says, and basically that's the magic of everything I did in the past 30 years. It's amazing, the book. And he describes how he's working with patients, getting rid of all the symptoms, like physical symptoms and also like mental symptoms. And I thought we will catch on later to that, because I think there is a great relation between honesty, what you just said, in the monetary system and how we deal with money. And this could also, I just want to drop it before I forget it later on, this could be an amazing connection also to Bitcoin, I think.
Absolutely.
Right?
You know what? I could not agree more. And what comes to mind is two things. The first, I stumbled across this sentence in a book years ago, and I don't remember the book, but it really stuck with me. And it is that depression is in the gap between expectation and reality. So if your expectation and reality align, there is no depression, because you see the world almost as accurately as possible. But when we have, as exactly as you're saying, when we have a predetermined idea about how we think reality works, and then reality doesn't meet that, that is that gap, that expectation, that gap between expectation and reality. And kind of the second point, which is, as I went down this rabbit hole of kind of like money and health, I stumbled across this one chart, and it was that in North America from 1970 to present day, we have seen, so this is pretty much since we left the gold standard in 1971, we have seen a halving of single earner households where you're able to have one parent supporting the whole household. We've seen a doubling of dual earner households where both parents having to go out and work. What does that mean? It means that parents aren't able to spend as much time with their kids. They're not able to meet their kids' emotional needs to the extent they might like to, because they're spending more time trying to put food on the table, trying to put a roof over their head. Life is becoming harder. That also means that kids are spending more time with their peers. Well, the challenge is peers if you're exploring the world, it's the first time you're many times experiencing these situations. So you're learning together. You're not learning from someone who has got many years, decades ahead of you. And so what we're noticing in society today is we're lacking this cultural knowledge or these moral values being passed down. Kids feel lost. And I would argue it's because kids are no longer spending as much time as they have historically with their parents, with their elders. And it is through parents and elders that we pass down knowledge and culture. And that is how kids individuate. When kids spend time with their peers, well, they want to look the same, they want to sound the same, they want to dress the same. And so you end up with a society that never individuates. And so what's interesting, bringing it back to your point about honesty, is that internally, a kid may be feeling something. He may be feeling, hey, I don't like this situation. These people I'm spending my time with aren't the people that I align with. But because he's never taught to find his like individuated self, he's never spent that time with his parents who have kind of instilled certain values or moral boundaries. He doesn't know how to stand up for himself. And so he puts himself in these peer situations and leads to anxiety, leads to a depression. You want to look the same, sound the same, dress the same. And so we have a society of conformity, and kids feel lost. And it's no wonder that we're seeing rising rates of depression and anxiety and drug use, substance abuse, suicide. And I would argue it's because kids don't know who they are. They've never learned how to look inwards. They've only learned how to fit in and just conform to a small group or society because they're not spending time with their peers. Time with their parents, time with their elders. And going back to the root of it, I would argue that money has a huge part to play in that, because parents aren't able to spend as much time with their kids as they would like to.
Yeah, and one thing that comes to my mind, yesterday I had a recording with Thomas Strohleid, and we actually planned to talk about another topic, but then we went, like it is, down a rabbit hole. And what I realized, I told you before the recording, I lived in a van for a year, like next to a community. So from that day on, it's like 2.5 or 3 years ago, I'm constantly writing a concept for how I want to live when I'm getting old. And it's definitely multi-generational. The homes we had 200 years ago. And while writing that concept, I realized something that is like really, really odd. It's like you have something like a production line. This is how Thomas called it. So you have like school where you get prepared, like, and you're like in first grade, second grade, and you're prepared, then you're bumped out into the working world, which is like the main compartment, right? And then one day you're obsolete. You retire. And what's really interesting, I tie that two things together now. What's really interesting is that you have the working community, or working people, but they pay to keep the young kids away from them so they can focus on work, but they pay for it. And they pay for the elder people to be in elderly homes, right? But the working class pays for it to be more productive, have more time, not to take care of them, which is so absolutely weird. And what I then realize is, because we both are not in that age, what is really interesting that you lose your sort of purpose when you drop out of your career. And I imagine that must be very tough if you like go the classical career ladder, something like that. Then you drop out and nobody is interested in talking to you anymore because you don't have any title or something. And I think that this wisdom that older people have, we just cut it out of society most of the time, right? And it strongly connects with what you're just saying. So kids grow up, older people are just moved away from them. Instead of like it was earlier, they are brought together. So, what I found fascinating, if you go down that rabbit hole, is that I don't get the quote and I will butcher it, so I just say it like out of my head. There was a guy who said, actually, back in the days, it was like the grandparents were the real parents because they were wise, they could communicate culture, because parents are actually kids getting kids, right? So I thought like this is okay, and what I never thought is like this. What you just said is like the culture is vanishing if you don't have contact to your parents or your grandparents. It's like, who is transporting culture? Media, but that's it, right?
No,
So
I think you hit on such a good point, which is that there is certain tribes, take the Aborigines. Aborigines, from my understanding, we have evidence that they date back tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. They've passed down culture through tens of thousands of years, and they're still here today. And what do you see? They're living in these communities. They're passing knowledge down through multiple generations. You see something like the hippie culture of the 60s and 70s, 2 generations into that, and it's almost extinct. Why is it almost extinct? Well, it's a peer culture. It's a culture built upon a small community within a small age bracket. So everyone's trying to look the same, sound the same, but they're not actually passing down any knowledge. They're not passing down that culture. They just want to conform. And so I would say that a lot of these, whether it's the goths, whether it is the hippies, whether it is all of these little kind of cliques, all of these little niches that we see that have emerged over the last 40, 50 years, are just because people are trying to conform. They're just trying to find themselves because they're not having that guidance from their parents and their peers. And there was a point that I kind of wanted to touch on that you kind of brought up, which was this idea that I think humans have a phenomenal ability to try and tinker and improve and increase efficiency and optimize. But the problem is when money is broken, when money's purchasing power is diminishing, what do we optimize for? We don't optimize for community and connection. Instead, we optimize for making money. And so a few years back, and I'll tie this all together in a moment, but a few years back, I had a group of unbelievably inspirational individuals. I took them mountain biking. I was a mountain bike guide for a long time. I took them mountain biking. And one individual, he was writing a book at the time. And he was multi-millionaire, well into like 8-9 figures. And he had mentioned to me that if we step back and we look at our goal setting as a society, many times we're optimizing for what are called the 3 Ps: prestige, power, and possessions. We want the newest car. We want the Lamborghini. We want kind of power. We want the kind of the position. We want the prestige. We want people to look up to us. Now, if we actually step back and ask ourselves the question, what have been 2 or 3 of my most memorable moments in my life? And I'd urge anyone who's listening to this to like hit pause and think about it. What have been the most memorable moments in my life? And the reality is that it's rarely, if ever, the 3 Ps. And instead, it's the 3 Cs, which are connections, contributions, and challenges. It's when we connect to others and we build community. It's when we contribute, when we give back, and it's when we challenge ourselves. And so I think the challenge is when money is breaking down, we optimize for making money. Our mind becomes consumed with, how do I get money? How do I support my kids? How do I put food on the table? Or if you are wealthy, we optimize for, how do I protect my wealth? Where do I need to put it to be able to preserve my purchasing power for the next generation? Instead, what we should be optimizing for is, how do I just freaking build connection? How do I build community? How do I challenge myself so I can show up more wholeheartedly? And this is where I just think it is so fascinating, is that money, there is a hidden cost to money, which is when it breaks down, it has this ripple effect throughout all of society, and it impacts how we show up as individuals. It impacts us on a psychological level because we start optimizing for money as opposed to connection and contribution and challenges. I think like money is far more powerful than just this medium of exchange that we think it is.
yeah, and when you just say like it's pulling away like energy, attention, right? What I really liked is like when I watched like at the very beginning the Breedlove and Sailor series about like what is money? Like the first, I don't know, 18 episodes or 18 hours, I don't know. And actually I used that, not analogy, but I think talk and energy is the best thing how you can connect the conscious spiritual realm with physics and economy. And if you just think of that, you have an economy, or let's say a community of animals, right? And the money is life energy, right? It stands for what you already did and the time you already spent. And in the current system, there's like approximately 50% tax. So 50% of that life energy of these animals is gone. And then you have inflation. Now we can argue about how high inflation really is, but let's be humble. Let's say 10%. So 60% of the life energy of all beings in one system is drained. It's like, how the fuck could that be healthy? It's like nature would normally, like evolutions like that, I would say nature would kill beings like that. Because it's just very wasteful, right? And nature normally doesn't work like that. It is like, but it's very interesting. Always when you bring it down to the energy level, it gets so clear because you just, the whole distraction, the noise, you can just cut it out. It's just like, okay, you're losing 60% energy. It's like, just imagine you had like a tumor consuming like 60% of all your energy. How is your daily life going to look? Not very well, I suppose.
It's profound when you step back and you start looking at the world from a holistic standpoint, because it's like, one, you've got something like inflation, the impact of obviously declining purchasing power on how we show up as individuals. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of that impacts us personally, but you also have the impact of monetary intervention on a macro scale. So let me take a step back for a second. If you ever read the book, there's a book called The Carnivore Code by Paul Saladino, and there's another book called Deep Nutrition, and it dives into our kind of ancestral history. And one of the things it talks about is how 60 million years ago is when humans started to kind of really separate from apes. And what was interesting is that our brain size pretty much stayed the same for 57.5 million years of that 60 million years. And then a few interesting things happened. One, we became bipedal. We could stand up on two legs. Two, we developed the articulating shoulder. We could start throwing things like spears, rocks. We could start hunting more effectively. And three, we developed the whites in our eyes. It's called the sclera. And what's interesting about that is apes have black eyes. They don't have a white sclera. And that means that when there is food scarcity, they're able to look around them to see where food is, but other apes cannot see where they're looking. So they can scan the area for food shortages without others seeing. Well, as humans, we started to be able to collaborate with one another and hunt in silence, because with the sclera, we can see where each other is looking. So we can hunt in communities, in tribes, without others seeing without others hearing us. And that allowed us to all of a sudden become the apex predator. So we could stand up bipedal, we could run long distances, we could throw spears with articulating shoulders, and we could hunt in silence with the sclera. And all of a sudden, over 2.5 million years, our brain size tripled in size because we became the apex predator. We were predominantly eating an animal-based diet. So we were getting high nutritious, high nutrient density food, and brain size expanded. And this allowed us to really start to thrive as a species. Well, what was interesting is the agricultural revolution came about 10,000 years ago, 10 to 15,000 years ago, and we started to create grain and kind of more farming techniques. And our brain size since then has dropped 10 to 15% as a result of eating grain-based products, moving away from animal-based. Okay, so how does money tie into this? Well, it was around the 30s or 40s, and don't quote me on this, the dates, but in around the 30s or 40s, the US government decided to start subsidizing grain production. So what ended up happening? All of these farmers that were farming, whether it was cattle, whether it was more organic rotational farming methods, moved over to farming grain, because with subsidies, they were able to create artificial profit that would not exist in a free market. So you had everyone move over from traditional methods of farming over to grain production. Then you had this boom in grain production. As a result of the boom in grain production, we started to see things like high fructose corn syrup enter our diet. We also saw the absolute boom in companies like Kellogg's and Quakers, these huge grain-based corporations. And with that excess profit, because there was this artificially cheap access to grain, they were able to lobby the government. What did they do? They lobbied the government, they lobbied the FDA, and they created the food pyramid. And they inverted our natural way of eating for millions of years that allowed us to thrive, which was predominantly animal-based, supplemented with vegetables and grains, and they flipped it on its head. And they said saturated fats are bad, and we should be eating predominantly grain-based products. Well, this was in around the 30s or 40s, if I understand correctly. And there's a book called Seeds of Deception that talks about this. And what we saw since we've moved over to a predominantly grain-based economy is diabetes, obesity, all of basically that massive health epidemic that we have seen today as a result of the artificial subsidization of grain production. So when you have money that can be printed and then you go and support an industry that would not exist in a free market, you create all of these unintended consequences. And not only have we impacted the health of the economy, but because we've artificially rewarded grain production, we've created what is called the monocrop agriculture industry, where these farmers are growing on huge swaths of land one crop, grain. And because they're growing one crop, it is drawing all of the nutrients out of the soil. So we're seeing desertification. We're turning all of this incredible topsoil used to grow unbelievably nutritious food, we're turning it into sand. We're turning it into just desert.
I just want to enter one thing, because when I heard that for the very first time, what you're just saying, it's a statement from the UN. I will also butcher it. Don't take it like 100%. But it's about, this was a statement from a few years ago. So it's not yesterday. And they just said, we have, I don't know, 60, 70 harvesters left in most of the parts of Europe and the US. And afterwards, nothing will grow because the topsoil is just eroded. It's nothing in there anymore. And when I heard that, it's like, why is everybody talking about like climate change? This will kill us way faster, way. And it's so fascinating if you go down how some ancient cultures got extinct. It's that. It's that. It's just like build a temple, pile a lot of people in one place, crowd it, try to get the food. Works for a time, and then it's just doesn't work. I'm sorry, I just need to say that. And it's like you find that on Google. And when I first heard that, I was just like, this is just like so not working. And subsidies is one very interesting concept, which well, I never got. And then I guess we need to get back a little bit to the health. Because this is a topic I'm very also interested in. When you think that subsidies actually distract the market intelligence, so the intelligence millions of people develop through collaboration, the process you just described being like the one and only thing, how we got the apex predator. So you could say that maybe for there is nothing more important for human collaboration, for human evolution than collaboration, right? But we also managed to invent the only thing that could fuck that up, right? So starting with money and subsidies, so a redistribution of the energy in that system. And you say like, okay, we assume that 30 people out of that, not million, billion people, right, in a government are way smarter and they know what to do. And this is just something I definitely do not agree with at all. I think there is like, what do you think?
Oh, I could not agree more. And it shows it in the data. Like there is the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation, has highlighted that for every $5 of subsidies, only $1 of income is generated. And so we're completely decimating $4 of productive capital that could go elsewhere because there's a small cohort of individuals that believe that, hey, this is where we should spend our time and energy. In reality, we should allow the complex adaptive system, which is our economy, which is the populace, decide on what they deem as valuable. And I think that kind of going back to like health, the point you bring up, it's when we subsidize the economy, we impact health on whether it is a species health, or we are completely decimating whether it is obesity, diabetes, like our natural internal bodily health, and we have a species that is struggling. Fertility is falling off a cliff. Whether it is the natural health of the environment, whether it's monocrop agriculture, to that point, we're destroying our natural environment as a result of removing all of the nutrients from the topsoil. Or we are seeing it from the perspective of when money loses purchasing power, all of a sudden we're no longer incentivized to save. Instead, we're actually incentivized to consume, because saving, if our purchasing power is going to diminish over time, well, why would I save? I wouldn't. Instead, my purchasing power is greatest in this present moment, so I'm just going to be impulsive. I'm going to spend it on whatever it is that I need right now, right here, right now. And so we have a society that is built upon, I'm going to fulfill my needs through consumption habits. Well, consumption consumes resources. We end up destroying our waterways, we destroy our natural, the grounds, our forests. And so I would say that our consumption habits, as a result of deteriorating money, are impacting our natural environment. The subsidies are impacting our internal health. And then you also have the impact of things like when purchasing power is diminishing and cost of living is rising, that puts so much stress on the individual. Money today is the number one stressor globally. Well, how does that impact us? Well, stress, we know from countless scientific studies, when we hold stress in the body and our body is releasing all these stress hormones, epinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, it leads to all of these other health issues. We have shortened lifespan, we have higher rates of allergies, again, depression, anxiety. And what is interesting is that it doesn't even just start from me as an individual facing stress. If a mother who is carrying a child is feeling stress and is flooding that child with stress hormones, well, that child's nervous system becomes hyperreactive. When that child enters this world, because he's already been flooded with stress hormones with a hyperreactive nervous system, we have got countless studies that show shorter lifespan, much higher rates of ADHD, autism, health issues, you name it. And so before a kid has even entered into this world, because of the monetary stress parents are facing, the kid is already being impacted on a developmental level. And so again, like stress is profound, because stress really does percolate throughout society and impact us intimately on a cellular level.
And are you familiar with the work from Bruce Lipton?
Yeah.
And this is like when preparing. So for people who don't know them, he was a stem cell scientist, I guess, starting in the 70s when nobody knew that stem cells were around. And what he actually discovered, what I found is like fascinating. By that time, and for a quite longer time until I guess end of the 90s something, everybody thought like the genes define like your health, right? There is the code, and if you get sick or if you're healthy, it's defined by the genes. And what he realized when working with stem cells is if you put them in a nutrient solution, they become very different things. They could become a liver cell or they become bones. So then he asked himself, so is it in the genes, or is like actually the surrounding, the field it's in, defining what somebody or something becomes something? And then, actually he went away from like the pure science and went to like, what kind of impact do your thoughts have on your health? And this is what I think fascinating. And this is actually, I guess, the root of epigenetics, I guess, right? So I have one quote from him. This is the only one I really wrote down to not butcher it. Hold on. Where do I have it? Here. When you're living in fear, this is what you just described. You shut down the growth and maintenance of the body as you prepare for fight or flight. When your fear hormones are put in the body, we shut down any mechanism that is not necessary in a fight or flight response. This is particularly important in regards to the immune system.
You know what? So when you go down the rabbit hole of somatic therapy, one of the areas we touch on is our stress response systems. So to this point that you were discussing, and let's take imagine you're in the jungle, and all of a sudden you see a lion. If you see that lion, we recognize, you know what? I'm not going to be able to outrun this thing. So you go into freeze. What happens when you go into freeze? The stress response system, fight, flight, freeze. When you go into freeze, you want to try and maximize your chance of survival. So over millions of years, we slow our heartbeat. So we slow blood flow, which slows our cognitive function. We slow our breathing rate. As we slow our heartbeat, our breathing rate, well, that slows digestion. So all of a sudden, we're not absorbing nutrients. Now, that's fine to do for a short period of time if we're trying to maximize survival. But if, say, our mum was feeling immense amounts of stress and was flooding our development while we're in her womb with stress hormones, and we enter into this world stuck in a state of what's called functional freeze, we can be existing in this world, moving through this world, permanently stuck in functional freeze with a suppressed nervous system, a suppressed immune system, suppressed breathing rate, suppressed heart rate. And it can be very hard for us to show up. And you wonder why, like as I mentioned earlier, that people end up with a shorter lifespan. And it's because their body is not functioning. And so certain individuals, they can go see doctors, they can go and try and treat things with pharmaceuticals. But what they don't actually realize is that they're just stuck in a fight, flight, or freeze response that's impeding their ability to show up naturally. They're impeding their body's natural ability to digest, their natural ability to be able to flush toxins, to detox. And that, to me, I think the connection between money and our natural immune system, our stress response system, is a profound one that we have not done enough studying on.
It's actually, so going back, I need to drop that now before I forget it. You said it at the very beginning, so I want to go to that. Human collaboration is what brought us forward, right? And money, you said money is the language for what we value. But let's put it in another light. It's like money is the language of collaboration, right? So if the language is fucked up, yeah, guess what's happening? Our evolution is running backwards. And this is exactly what you said with the brain capacity, right? So, and if you are in that kind of fear-based surrounding, and I guess like the new tiger or the new mammoth of our time is money, and the big distinction between a tiger, which might kill you or might leave if he didn't get you, is money sticks around for a long, long, long time, and it will never leave. So we talked about that when we have a bad system, but let's see it as a kind of neutral. And there is a, not famous. For me, he's famous because I think he's a genius, but I guess in the world, nobody knows him. He's called Dr. Hammer. I guess he's dead meanwhile. He developed something that was called the New Germanic Medicine. So everything was in German. I don't even know if it's available in English. I have no clue. So what that dude discovered is exactly what you just said. That actually every illness we face is based on a psychic trauma, fear-based. And he discovered that he get, I don't know, is it testicle cancer? Yeah, right.
Testicular cancer.
So, he got it after his son died in a hunting accident. And he immediately got sick. So he went to other doctors. They're like, yeah, we can't do anything. We can just cut it off. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's not such a cool solution. So I tried to figure out, work with that. And what he discovered over the years is that cancer is actually the result of us delaying these traumas and never solving them. And he says, like, money, financial crisis is like, it's the same. If you're scared for your life, it doesn't matter if it's a tiger or a dollar. You think it kills you, which ties in with the stuff from Bruce Lipton, right? If you think it kills you, it will kill you. And then he could draw lines between very distinct sorts or types of cancer and specific types of trauma people were suffering from. So breast cancer in women, and it's like, and he draw like a whole table where you could just read what you got, and then you could go and think like, okay, what happened in my life in the past like weeks or months? And he analyzed everything like from breast cancer to a cold. And this is like really, really fascinating. And he said like the only issue we have, we don't let go conflict and trauma, we keep it. And this is the reason why we see cancer. This is why there was no cancer earlier, because people solved stuff or died, actually, right? Or died.
You know what? So this point you are making is something that truly altered the course of my career and how I view the world. And there's two books in particular that stood out to me. There's one called When the Body Says No by a guy called Gabor Mate. There's another one.
He's awesome, the trauma guy.
He is phenomenal. Yeah, he's based out of Vancouver. And there's another one called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, I think, and she's Dutch. And both of those talk about how our health issues, we create an internal environment that triggers a lot of those health issues, to your point. And one of the things that was mentioned in one of these books, I can't remember which one it was, which was women with breast cancer tend to have certain personality traits. And they many times will put others before themselves. They've never set this boundary of acknowledging their own needs, and so they'll put others before themselves. And so as a result, it is leading to some form of cellular environment that is leading to cancer. This is profound. One of the other things that they found is in one study,
I need to jump in. I'm very, very sorry, because it's fascinating. I thought of like bringing in the example of breast cancer because the doctor I just talked about, he describes it very clearly, and it absolutely ties in with what you're saying. You know that moment when you try to explain Bitcoin to friends and family, and 30 seconds in, they are already rolling their eyes. Yeah, same here. And still, I felt this is one of the most important conversations of our time. So I started wondering, how can we make this beautiful, radical idea accessible to the people we love? That's why I wrote Unfuck Money. Not about price charts, not about tech. It's about money as life energy and how the system we live in quietly drains it. Unfuck Money is the simplest, most mind-expanding guide to why things feel off, and how Bitcoin might just change everything. Written for people into spirituality, self-growth, and truth, not spreadsheets. This isn't just a book, it's a bridge. A way to show your partner, your mom, your best friend, why Bitcoin isn't just internet money, but a peaceful revolution. Go to unfuck-money.com and learn more, and get the book on Amazon as paperback or Kindle. And if you've heard of Bitcoin but still have no real idea what it is, yet something in this message speaks to you, then this book might be exactly what you've been waiting for. Because I think it will change our world even more than the invention of the internet. Unfuck your money, reclaim your energy. So putting people, you said like in front of your own needs. So you take care of them before you take care of yourself. Right. So what he realized is that breast, which is a symbol for nurturing somebody, right? You have a conflict or a trauma for people you should have taken care for. That could be your child, but it could also be your husband. But most of the time it's the child. The child doesn't need to die, but it could also be, I'm trying to take care of my child, but I'm not able to, because like the financial system is not working, for example, and I'm working like 2 jobs, it's not working. and the result is especially that, right? And with breast cancer, I found, and he has like really, he draw like a table. You can download it and see like the cancer types, and it's just like it makes so much sense.
It's
And what you
profound.
just said, yeah, what you just said is it's actually that. So if you're afraid that you can't take care of somebody you should take care of, you will always put them in front because you think of like you're owing something or you need to do something. You never take care of yourself. So it's actually two sides of the same coin. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so to take it one step further, there's a book. I keep giving books, but these books have profoundly changed how I view the world. And it's a book called Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. And this woman, it was something like stage 4 cancer, tumors throughout her whole body. And the doctor basically said, look, you've got like a month to live. Unfortunately, we can't do anything about this. You've got a month to live. That's not even worth us doing chemo or kind of intervening. And she ended up having a near-death experience. She passed on momentarily. And when she passed on, she saw her dad. And what was interesting is her dad died when she was a teenager. And she had this belief that she had let her dad down. She'd never lived up to her dad's expectations. And she had carried this guilt throughout her whole life. And if I remember correctly, she was probably in her 40s, 50s when she ended up having this near-death experience. And her dad said, now is not your time. You can go back. And she went back. She entered back into this world. It was a near-death experience. But because she was able to let go of that grief that she had been holding for 30 years, within something like 4 days, all of those tumors dissolved in her body. And this isn't just some fictional story. This is documented. The doctor who worked on her is just like, I've never seen anything like this. And what is interesting is, so I went to a talk by Gabor Mate. This was about 3 years ago. And he says, what doesn't make sense to me is why, when people have cancer, we try and cut out the tumor. Because the reality is that tumor is being created as a result of some form of internal process. And so if we cut out the tumor without changing the process, the tumor is going to regrow. And it is why when people go do chemo, it's got something like an 87% rate of cancer returning. And so it's just like, why? Because you've not changed the process. Whether that process is from our diet because we're eating poor food, whether that process is from external toxins because we're being exposed to heavy metals, whether that process is an internal self process of how we think about ourselves, the traumas we're carrying, we're not changing the environment, and so that tumor will return. And what I think is mind-blowing is you bring it back to money. Well, how does money play a role in this? When money is breaking down, we become hyper-fixated on money and we have to focus on just trying to survive. When we're trying to survive, when we're fearful, our aperture of awareness narrows. And it means that we can't actually focus on looking inwards or spending time contemplating or growing as an individual on a spiritual, on an internal level. And in psychology, there's this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's kind of like a 5-tier pyramid. And at the base, we have our basic survival needs, which is kind of like food and shelter. And then as we start moving up, we start getting into relational needs like intimacy and friends and community. And then as we start moving up, we get into kind of esteem needs. So confidence and showing up on like respect for oneself, respect for others. And then finally, at the very top, we have like self-actualization, more of our spiritual growth needs. Like how do we be the best version of ourselves, reach our full potential? Well, what's interesting is if we want to move through many of these traumas that are creating these processes, we need to have capacity. We need to have time and space to be able to look inwards. But the challenge is our monetary environment means we're getting stuck on the base level. We're getting stuck trying to meet our basic survival needs, food and shelter, because life is getting harder and harder and harder. And so I think money plays such a huge role in how we show up as individuals.
And so we talked a lot about what's not working. And considering money being the language of collaboration, there's a new language that came up called Bitcoin, right?
I haven't heard of this one.
No, I can explain it in one sentence. No, and actually, like, let's exchange the language, and let's get like more to like the future vision now, because I truly think I would love to talk about the other stuff as well, because it's fascinating, and I don't find that much people who connect all that dots of that, and it's very interesting. And that dude, and especially we come to that later with artificial intelligence. I have an idea, but now talking about Bitcoin, like having a monetary solution that is actually free from inflation. If you're listening and try to figure out why this is not the podcast where we explain all that, there are like 5 million podcasts out there where you can learn that, but you don't have inflation, which I think is very, very interesting, right? That's one aspect. And the subsidies wouldn't work, what we described. So to put it in the biggest picture we could talk about is there is nobody who could fuck with our life energy. This is a good summary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that if we take it all the way back to kind of the point that I mentioned at the very start, which is money, to me, the way I view it is it's a medium of expression. It's how we express to the world what it is that we value. The problem with money today is that it's impeding our ability to express what we value. It's like a child who can't express sadness, can't express anger, can't express frustration because parents don't let him. It's the same thing with money. Money, because of inflation and all of these byproducts, we are unable to express what we value. Well, with Bitcoin, all of a sudden, and without getting too into the details, into the weeds of how, Bitcoin is a trustless permission. You don't need to trust intermediaries, third parties. You don't need permission to be able to spend your money. You can direct your money where you see fit. And to your point, there's scarcity. There's only ever going to be 21 million. What that means is it preserves, if not grows, your purchasing power as society thrives. And so all of a sudden, you have an ability to express yourself monetarily wholeheartedly. And that, to me, is profound. So we just spoke about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how when money breaks down, we get stuck on this base layer of meeting our basic survival needs of food and shelter. Well, what happens when our purchasing power is increasing as opposed to decreasing? Well, it flips everything on its head. All of a sudden, rather than life getting harder and harder and harder, and it becoming more challenging to meet our basic survival needs, it becomes easier. And if it's easier to meet our basic survival needs of food and shelter, well, then we can start moving up to the next rung. So we're able to start thinking about relationships. We're able to start thinking about intimacy and community. And then once we start meeting our intimacy needs and our community needs, we can start moving up to the self-esteem needs. So how do I want to show up? What is it that I value as an individual? Well, man, you know what? I want to challenge myself more. I want to go down this path. Well, because we have more capacity, we can do those things. So we start to heal ourselves from a trauma perspective more. And then we can get up more into the absolute top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, which is kind of like self-actualization needs. So spirituality, creativity, morality. And I would argue that when society starts moving up this pyramid, I think society is just going to absolutely thrive as opposed to being stuck on the base, which we are today. And so Bitcoin has the potential to completely reorient our trajectory towards like healing and community and growth. And I've never had so much hope in my life towards a future.
And just let's paint a very simple picture that just came to my mind. We were talking about like a tiger or any dangerous animal. And the current setting would be, okay, you sleep outside, maybe if you're lucky around a fire. But you always need to be aware that you could be eaten any minute. How relaxed are you? How healthy are you? How could you be in touch with self-actualization? Yeah, not at all, right? So and now you discover this like great cave where you could like sleep in and put a big stone in front of the entrance while sleeping. What does that do to your nervous system? Probably the first time you've slept in your whole life. And you would get done like very, very different stuff.
And to that level, we can relate that to our present environment, which is when money is deteriorating, all of a sudden, people aren't just going to continue to save in the dollar or their local currency. Instead, what do? They go and store that purchasing power. They save in assets. And so we move that purchasing power into things like real estate, things like farmland. But we no longer use real estate for its utility purpose, which is putting a roof over our family's head. We use it to store money. And we no longer use farmland to produce crops and give back to society. We use it to store value. And so we take real estate and we take farmland off the market for its utility purpose, which benefits the community, because we use it for its monetary purposes as opposed to its utility purposes. Now, what is fascinating about Bitcoin is when we have a vehicle in which we can save again, we no longer have to go and find other assets, things like farmland and real estate, to store our purchasing power. All of a sudden, that money would leave those utility vehicles and they would start moving back into the currency, back into Bitcoin. And that means that house prices, I believe, would be far cheaper. And I believe things like farmland would be far, far, far cheaper. And they'd be primarily used for their utility purpose because we have a vehicle that's dedicated to saving. We no longer have to use real estate and farmland to save. And as a result, if you as an individual are drawn towards farming because it's something that you feel energetic pull towards, I want to be on the land. I want to give back to society and grow vegetables and nurture animals. All of a sudden, you would have greater capacity to do so. Today, farming is it's an elite thing. If you want to buy a piece of land, 20 acres, 30 acres, 100 acres, you need a lot of money to do so. So farming has become out of touch for most people. And it's the same thing, even purchasing a property. People are so fearful and stuck and they can't rest or relax, to your point, because they don't know if that roof that they have over their head, they're going to be able to afford it in a year's time, 2 years' time, 5 years' time. So all of a sudden with Bitcoin, if everyone is saving in Bitcoin because they have a vehicle to save in and house prices become cheaper and cheaper over time, then more people can buy houses for its utility purpose that calms the nervous system. And as people are able to calm that nervous system, I believe they're going to have more capacity to focus on that internal healing of the trauma, healing of that environment that is leading to illness, leading to tumor, leading to cancers. And that to me is profound.
And it's actually what you just said is actually, I brought the analogy with the cave, but actually it's about the cave. So just imagine people wouldn't struggle with like paying rent. This would heal like probably millions of people. It's just like no matter what, I can put food on the table and have somewhere to sleep. This is like the biggest relaxation for your nervous system ever, because the rest is just like not luxurious, but you don't need it to survive. You have a cave to sleep and you have something to eat.
Could not agree more. And before we hit record, you had mentioned you were in Vancouver and you were talking about the homeless crisis that we see. And, it blows me away that if we step back and look at the environment we're creating right now, it is one where, unfortunately, people increasingly vote left because the government says, we're going to support you. We're going to give you subsidies. We're going to give you handouts. We're going to give you stimulus checks, and it's going to make your life easier. But that is only in the short term. When you're given that $2,000 stimulus check so you can make rent this month, well, because everyone has been handed this money, more money in society, increase in money supply, prices rise, life gets harder. And so if you're a homeless individual, would you rather be living in a world where the government is every so often drip feeding you a little stimulus check, but life is getting exponentially harder? Or would you rather live in a world where over time prices are getting cheaper, where life is getting easier? And that, to me, I think we would solve so many of our issues if people just, life got easier, prices fell, you had greater capacity.
And now I think this is like, I don't know the saying in English, and I wouldn't try to translate the German one, but you would ask especially the wrong person for that question, because you would ask the homeless person, right? Do you want like instant satisfaction by drip feeding? Or do you want like the longer, better solution? So the more people get into drip feeding, the less people make any decision, because they always think like short term, right? So talking about Bitcoin is also, there are like a lot of podcasts about like that long-term vision. And I think it's like when you are able to think in 2 to 3 generations, then you make smart decisions. As long as you're thinking about yourself, it's like it's okay, but it's not really smart, right? So let's now try to get. I'm just watching. We have like half an hour left. If we would pay our attention to the imaginary world we're trying to create in that podcast based on the transmissions, there is a place in 2140, and we received that transmission. We watched it at the very beginning. And there is one example how they solved it. They actually have no healthcare system, healthcare drip feeding system, let's put it that way, because they just created something else where it's worth it being healthy. So if we try to immerse into that world, like, what do you think? How would it look like? Would there still be like health insurance?
So what's interesting is I think that, again, as we've discussed up until now, the challenges we face is that in a free market, capital flows to where value is being created.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, if you as an individual, you have a company and you have a money printer in your back office and you can hit print, do you have to listen to the community? Do you have to actually offer value? No, you don't have to, because you can simply hit print to be able to fund operations. Well, that's the environment we live in today. Governments, unfortunately, because they have a money printer, they don't ever have to listen to the populace. They don't actually have to create value. Well, when we flip that on its head, if we lived on a Bitcoin standard, all of a sudden, governments would have to act like any other business in a free market. They would have to offer value. And the only way for them to obtain capital, to obtain taxes, is for them to be able to offer value. Because with Bitcoin, you have to voluntarily want to hand over that money. If you don't want to hand over that money, it's very hard to seize. And so this is a profound world, the shift from the world we currently live in. Unfortunately, at the moment, people are pretty much subservient to government. In a Bitcoin world, I very much believe the government is subservient to the people. If it does not put the people first and listen to the populace, it withers away because it cannot obtain capital to fund operations. Now, this is profound, because if it's listening to the people and it has to offer value, well, on top of that, given that it has to be fiscally responsible and fiscally conscious, it starts to think longer term. So if you think about the health of the economy and you think about the health of the populace, does it make sense, if you are very limited in your cash flow, does it make sense to go and subsidize these pharmaceutical industries, pay for all of these medicines that basically just treat the symptom? Or does it make sense to think about, you know what is the most cost-effective way to think about health long term? Well, the most cost-effective way is actually to maybe think about, how do we create an environment where people want to show up more authentically, people want to live more healthy, so that we don't have to rely on medicine, we don't have to rely on intervention. And so I think that
prevention instead of intervention.
100%. Instead of being reactionary, we become proactive. And I think that this is what is profound about something like Bitcoin, is it flips our mindset. Instead of being impulsive and meeting our immediate needs and trying to meet the populace in terms of subsidies, stimulus, we're just trying to buy the vote right now. Instead, it's, how do we create a society that is thriving? How do we end up thinking long-term about building security and prosperity? And so Bitcoin, we already see this taking place on an individual level. What is so fascinating is that Bitcoiners are starting to have kids. We're seeing so many Bitcoiners have kids. We're seeing so many Bitcoiners start to have hope, start to build incredible non-profit corporations that are adding value to society. And this is in contrast to where I live in the Sea to Sky Highway from Vancouver up to Whistler in Canada. Barely anyone is having kids. The cost of living is so expensive that it's altering how people are showing up. So everyone's just being impulsive. They're trying to meet their immediate needs. And, I'll share one quick story, which is yesterday I had a Zoom call with an individual, a Bitcoiner. And he said to me, he was in the military and he had spent his whole life focusing on, I want to protect my nation. And then when he went into the military, he was just like, this is not what I expected. This is the military industrial complex. This is not meeting my needs. I do not feel like I'm serving humanity here. And this completely reframed his perspective on the world. He felt very kind of heavy about our trajectory, and then he found Bitcoin. He went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and during this whole journey, one thing had kind of stuck with him. He wanted to make a difference on an ecological level. He wanted to restore natural environments. He wanted to cap wells that were kind of impacting our ecological spaces. He wanted to kind of be able to support the rainforests and such. But he was like, there's no chance, given the money I earn, that I'm ever going to be able to do that. But what is interesting is when he started saving in Bitcoin, over a period of a few years, he saw his purchasing power increase to the point where he was able to go and purchase a plot of land and develop those ecological skills to support his plot of land. And then that expanded to the point where he was like, you know what, I'm going to start a nonprofit. He started a nonprofit. Now he takes in investment capital, invests it in Bitcoin, pays a dividend to those individuals, and then uses the proceeds to go and restore acres and acres and acres of natural environment, ecological spaces, capping wells, you name it. And so Bitcoin has provided him the capacity to be able to, what was once a dream, turn his dream into a reality. And I think this is what we're going to start seeing on a global level, is that at the moment we're stuck surviving. We're not thinking about the future. We're not thinking about prosperity. We're not thinking about giving back. We're not thinking about being altruistic and compassionate because we're stuck in survival needs. And Bitcoin flips it completely on its head, where we have more capacity to give back, more capacity to focus on what really matters, and thinking outside of ourselves. Because when we're fearful, our aperture of awareness narrows. When we have more capacity, our aperture of awareness widens.
Mm-hmm. And when you think of the state getting out of, let's call it, the health sector at all, right? It also has some sense of decentralization. So it would probably be more, like companies. And to point that out, I'm a big fan of capitalism. I think good capitalism is the base layer for human collaboration, if it's ethical, right? So, and it's not distorted, what we talked about. So there would be probably a lot more of like companies really building very, very interesting solutions for health problems in the first stage. But again, let's try to immerse. It's 100 years from now. So I know it's very hard to imagine. So there would be probably at least one generation who was born into a Bitcoin standard. For them, it's history that there was a dollar or a euro. And telling them, I had a conversation with my son yesterday, I guess, about that. And it's so freaky. And just imagine you would talk about like, yeah, we had that money, and but it was losing value. Then the kid would ask like, yeah, but why would you use that? Yeah, because everybody did. And it's like, we kept down talking about that. And I said like, and it's not so insane, because the questions you asked me about people going by car. So when I got my first car and I went to visit my grandma in like 400 kilometers away, I used like big maps, physical maps in the car while driving in a city I didn't know. And he was just like, this is insane. Why didn't you use Google Maps? And I was like, yeah, there was no Google Maps. It was like in the browser, but then I tried it once and printed it out. And then I just made a wrong turn and everything you could throw in the garbage because you didn't know where to go. And I think this will be actually the setting we're in. So we have a lot of, or we have a generation in 100 years that doesn't know the dollar, doesn't know the euro, is not familiar with financial struggle, at least the way we know it today, right? And actually what I think, and that was in the intro into the transmission, is I think one of the smartest investments, if you really, really think long term, is education, right? How to get in touch with your emotions, and how to solve conflict in a community. Because just think of like what we had at the very beginning is like why we are so sick is because we don't talk about trauma, we don't resolve it, and we keep up conflict. So there is no tiger. We kept money and it's way longer. This is why we're so sick. So in case the money tiger is gone, let's accept that, and you would have the capacity to resolve conflict and to do, it sounds so esoteric, but the inner work to deal with your emotions. I don't even know if there would be a health system necessary like we know it today.
I
Don't you
agree.
think?
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that as I have gone down my own personal journey, as we discussed previously, I've increasingly become aware that I believe that our health status is a result of our environment, whether that is our external environment, whether that is a result of our internal environment. I think that we create our health status and we can manifest our reality to a certain extent. And we've lost sight of that. And so because we're stuck on the bottom rung trying to survive, our attention is towards, I just need a quick fix. I'm just going to rely on the expert. I'm going to rely on the drug. I'm going to treat the symptom as opposed to the root cause. And I think what is fascinating about Bitcoin is we flip that on its head. And we talked about it earlier. Like instead of being reactive, we become proactive. Well, the same thing. We're able to focus rather than on the symptom, treating the symptom and just getting by, we start focusing on the root cause. And I think what we're going to become increasingly aware of as we transition into this 2140 is that health is a result of our internal state. Health is a result of how we think about ourselves, the traumas. And so as we have more capacity, because life is getting easier, we can spend more time in contemplation. And it is through that contemplation that we move through these internal inner states. And we start moving through how our childhood traumas, our inner wounds. And as we move through those inner wounds, I think we're going to move through a lot of these health issues because I think they've been exacerbated over the last little while as our capacity has narrowed and we've become hyperfixated on survival. And I very much agree. I think if we were to fast forward 120 years, I'd be willing to bet that we don't have a healthcare system like the one we see today. Instead, we'd have guidance on how to look inwards more effectively, how to deepen our relationship with the self, and how to work on that inner healing that I think we're starting to see increasingly throughout the world in these small little pockets, one of those pockets being Bitcoiners. What is so cool to see in the Bitcoin community is as people are pulling on these little threads, such as health and nutrition and personal self-development work, we're seeing people move away from the current system of intervention and more towards that internal growth and that internal healing. And that, to me, I think Bitcoin is at the moment, this small little community, is kind of a potential reflection of what the world is going to look like in 120 years.
Yeah, and I think there is a very interesting effect. If you go down that rabbit hole and your thinking starts to change from like very short-term satisfaction to longer and longer term. So how I got into Bitcoin is because with my money, I was very impulsive. So I never put anything aside. It was like, I had phases where I earned a lot of money, but I was like giving it away immediately for stupid shit, to be honest. So I got into that because I said, like, I have no clue of investing. So I'm 40 now. I need to change now. Otherwise, I will have like major issues, major issues. There won't be any retirement fund when I'm retired. And everybody who thinks there is one is retarded, to be honest. Sorry, I don't know if am I allowed to say that? I don't know.
I support it.
So this is how I got into Bitcoin. And then I realized I have like really unhealthy habits and belief systems around money that I built. Once I got into Bitcoin and I saw that, so I got into that like when it was like at 63K something, and then it went immediately up to like 105. And it was like, fuck, saving is fun. I mean, I made a right decision. Of course, it went back, but but I saw that it had a positive outcome. And then it's not a conscious decision. What happened then is that I realized that's cool if I'm 70 and I'm one of the richest persons on planet, because this is the vision, right? Everybody's believing in the Bitcoin space. Nothing is more valuable than your health, because you can have all the money in the world, but if you're fucking sick, what are you going to do? So this was the first step, going from like month to month thinking to like developing like a 5-year plan with my money and saving in Bitcoin. And when I realized that I got traction, then I realized I need to think even more long term. So I think when I'm 70, and then it expanded. And actually the result is like thinking about my grandchild right now and having a podcast. But I think this is an effect that Bitcoin has on people immediately. Would you subscribe to that idea?
Absolutely. And at the very start, I mentioned this conversation I had with this amazing individual about the 3 Ps: prestige, power, and possessions, and how today we optimize for basically prestige, power, and possessions because life is hard. We're looking for a way out rather than a way in. Whereas I believe that when it comes to Bitcoin, we are increasingly realizing that actually it's not prestige, power, and possessions that make us happy. It is challenges, contributions, and challenges, contributions, and connections, or community. And I very much believe that as we start to see this transition from our current system into this Bitcoin world, or just a sound money world, life is going to become very different, where we recognize just how important connections, contributions, and challenges are. And we already see it with, when I speak to some unbelievably influential and very successful individuals, as they have more capacity financially to the point where they no longer have to worry about money, and then they've started down this spiritual journey, all of a sudden they realize just how much all of those things, all of that purchasing consumption stuff, all of that power and that prestige, it does not matter. It is not what makes us happy. And we see it with people like Jack Dorsey. People have probably seen Jack Dorsey's growth from creating Twitter, creating all of these various companies. Now he's got the beard, he's standing around the fire, he's focused on the internal journey as opposed to the external journey. And so I have a little group where each month, we call it our little spiritual group, and we meet once a month. We've done it for 3 years, and we range from, I think I'm the youngest in the group, all the way up to, there's an 85-year-old. There's about 6 of us that meet. And one of the conversations that comes up increasingly is that our current world pushes us to create what's called, which I label as kind of like active change. I'm trying to create and change the world around me. Whereas I think as I trend into Bitcoin further, and as I'm seeing others go down their Bitcoin path, they realize that, yeah, it's awesome going creating companies and creating this active change externally, but most of the change actually comes from within, and it's a passive change. And when you're actually working on yourself, you actually reverberate and you create energetic change amongst others just by rubbing up against them on an energetic level. And I think that rather than us trying to change the world around us constantly, I think we should be focusing on changing our internal state. And that's how we grow as a society, when we're vibrating at a very different frequency because we're working on ourselves. And that is, I believe, the world we're going to be living in 100 years, is it's about the internal world much more so than trying to change the external world.
Yeah, and just imagine, like, I got into personal development and spiritual experiences quite early, with like 23 something, because I became a dad. I wasn't prepared. I was like, okay, shit, I need to challenge my trauma because I don't want to pass it on to the next generation. That was actually the biggest kick in the ass to do stuff I knew for like at least 5 years I needed to do. But just imagine you have people, like a whole generation, working with that from like age 5. This is just so different. And what I realized, and I need to tie that in before we wrap that up for this episode. One thought, I guess all of us, you said like a vibration that our society has at the moment, and it's mostly fear-based because of that what we have. So the whole, and this is like an exponential growth, what most people can't imagine. If you have ever experienced going like from an unhealthy environment, could be family or friends, or separated, like most of the people would have like probably experienced a challenging relationship, going out of that, meeting a new person who's like positive and brings out the best in you. It's a game changer. And now imagine all the people, everybody knows the saying, like you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But now everybody is like that. This is like, you can't imagine. And we're so addicted to trouble, right? So we're very used to that. And that work life is hard and that you need to work hard to get stuff done. And I truly think that will change, especially because one thing we haven't tied in, and I'm so fascinated by that. If we look on the current technology we're seeing with AI and robotics, I'm thinking of like Jeff Booth, Price of Tomorrow, deflation is the normal state, right? And what I'm really excited, there were like huge inventions in all over history with the steam engine or stuff like that. But we have stuff that is more powerful than the steam engine to transform, and we have 3 of them at the same time. And this is why I'm just like, the world wouldn't. So it's Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, and robotics. And I bet like we can't even imagine how the world will look like in 5 years. Mm-hmm. That's what I personally think. So, and going through that, and like, let's call it like work is optional. It's really deflational because you have a Bitcoin standard, you have robotics, you don't have like physical labor if you don't want to. If you love to farm, you can, but actually you don't. And there is no one pulling the energy out of the system. So actually everybody could choose if they want to work. I truly believe we won't have depression. I guess people would thrive like hell. What's your opinion on that?
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I'll mention one thing, taking a step back, and then I'll bring it back to that, which is in one of Bruce Lipton's books, bringing back Bruce Lipton, because I think he's phenomenal. He talks about, and this is kind of bringing that vibrational energy, kind of grounding it in reality. He says, imagine you drop a rock into water. Naturally, you're going to get the ripples, the little waves from that rock. Well, if you drop 2 rocks into water and those waves meet one another, if they meet on a high, they amplify one another. If one is high and one is low, they neutralize one another. If both of them are on a low, they, again, amplify the low. Now, I think the world we live in today, unfortunately, is people are stuck on this kind of bottom rung of society. We're stuck in these vibrational low energy states that are amplifying one another, and it's kind of this feedback loop. Whereas I think when it comes to Bitcoin, going back to kind of this energetic approach, it's like, how do we create a world? And I believe Bitcoin does this, where we work on ourselves internally that allows us to grow, send out a very different energetic signal, and we're able to amplify and support one another. And it's fascinating because even like if you guys are walking down the street, I can sense, and I'm sure you've probably had the same, Patrick. I can sense when I jive with someone and when I don't. I don't even have to speak to them. I can feel it. Like you very much resonate. And I think it's because energetically, we're amplifying each other's wave as opposed to neutralizing each other or the worst, which is amplifying that kind of negative state. But so I think that kind of going back to your question, I very much believe that like the world we are moving into is a very, very different world from the world in which we have now. And I think that AI and robotics are going to play a profound role in allowing us to step back from being absorbed into surviving and allow us to focus more. And maybe and many Bitcoiners have spoken about this and have probably done it far more justice, but it's a new Renaissance state where it's like, it allows us to be far more creative, to be able to, as was spoken about, spend more time in contemplation. My friend once said to me, and it really, really stuck with me, and I've kind of slightly adapted the quote, which is, Bitcoin is a spiritual tool disguised as a get-rich-quick scheme for crypto bros. Everyone sees this get-rich-quick scheme for crypto bros and dismisses it. But when you actually peel back the layer, you realize, oh my God, this is like one of the most profound spiritual tools we've ever had, because what it does is it gives us capacity. It gives us capacity to show up far more authentically, to be able to direct our energy to what it is that matters to us, whether that is family, whether that is community, whether it's spending time in the mountains, whether it's being creative, whatever it is that matters most to you. Today, our time is being sapped by broken money, and we're trying to survive. In a Bitcoin world, we have more capacity to focus on whatever it is that motivates us. And I think in doing so, we're going to start to heal that inner world. We're going to feel more whole. We're going to meet those self-esteem needs. We're going to feel more accomplished. We're going to feel more confident. And I think that is going to be able to have a profound impact on societal health, on personal health everywhere. And I think AI robotics kind of helps free us from this stuck survival mode. But that is not possible without, as you're saying, like the third point, Bitcoin and money. If our money is breaking down and life is getting harder, we're going to become subservient to AI and robotics. We need a monetary system that allows us to be able to work in conjunction with AI and robotics and not become subservient to it.
Yeah, especially because otherwise there's the saying like history rhymes. And just imagine, are you familiar with Kondratiev cycles? So there is, so like you have core inventions that drive like the economy for like roughly 80 years till the next cycle takes over from like another invention. And we had enough of those, right? Like the steam engine, like computers, that due to the fact that the monetary system was broken the whole time, the energy was flowing into the pockets of not very many, very little amount of people. So the distribution was broken. The language of collaboration was broken. The distribution of energy of those individuals in those systems, although there was this amazing technology progress, the energy was sacked out of the system. And if you have Bitcoin as, let's call it the base layer, where all this amazing tech can build on, this will create something with the power and an impact we have never seen.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. Yeah. Oh man.
And what do you think about, like, we have, can you make like 5 minutes longer? A little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've prepared like 2 games. And we can play them. The very first one, let me see where it is here. If you have gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you know how it transforms your thinking and your life. But then something strange happens. Suddenly, your friends and family can't follow. You start seeing the world differently, and it gets lonely. That's why I created Satori Island, a curated community for people who believe Bitcoin could change more than just the economy. If you feel this revolution runs deeper, touching how we live, how we grow, how we relate to each other and to the world, then this is your invitation. Many of us feel the same, excited but isolated. Satori Island is where that changes. A shared space for learning, co-creating, and personal growth. Yes, we talk about Bitcoin, but also about what comes next, how we as humans and as a society evolve in the face of AI, robotics, and the deep systemic change. We explore personal health, spiritual development, and philosophy. Not as experts, but as people with questions. Go to satoriisland.com or just send me a message on X. I reply personally. And if you are a Bitcoin creator yourself, you know the effort it takes. Hours of content, weeks of research, sharing your heart and your mind. And yet, sometimes it's hard to truly connect with your audience. It's hard to interact and to learn from them, and even harder to build something sustainable from it. That's why I'm looking for 3 to 5 creators who feel this too and want to build something meaningful together. No big following required, no perfect plan, just vision, honesty, and the willing to build something real. So the game is, I give you words, 8 in total, out of 21. I pre-selected 8 for you based on the stuff I thought we would talk about. Maybe I will change. No, the most important word is in there. Let's see. I give you the first 5 and you just respond with one word that comes to your mind. And the last 3, you have like a whole sentence to respond. And it could be like really like from your gut. It's just like, what's the association you have with that? So the first one is truth.
Reconciliation.
Energy.
Vibrational frequency.
Freedom.
Sovereignty.
Change.
The word that comes up in my mind, although I don't quite know the relation to it, but what comes up from like a gut instinct is mapping.
Okay, we need to resolve that later.
I think I know where it's going.
Yeah. Trust.
Community.
Which brings us to the next thing. The responses with a whole sentence, and the first word is community.
Community. I would say, like, again, bring it back to kind of the discussion at the start, and we were talking about the 3 Ps and the 3 Cs, and one of those being kind of connection or community. I think that today we've become so distracted, and we've become disconnected from realizing the importance of love and community. And I think at the base layer of our existence is this idea of love and community and being able to find that community. And with Bitcoin, I've never found a community that I really feel on an energetic level, on a vibrational level, that I align with more. And you're just around such incredible individuals, such as yourself. And it really, really is profound to see the trajectory we're on.
AI.
AI is a tough one because AI brings up, I feel conflicted internally. AI, I think, is unbelievable in terms of its potential. And then there is a fear to the point at which we spoke about, where if we continue on our current trajectory, could we become subservient to AI? But, I'll share one quick story, which is just recently, not recently, but one of my best friends is going through a divorce right now. And she has been in a very traumatic relationship with an individual who, unfortunately, not a healthy relationship, a lot of kind of verbal abuse. And she receives daily, it's been 2 years of been going through this divorce, and she receives daily abuse from this guy. And so I was like, you know what? I have an idea. So I went home, I spent a few hours, and using Zapier, which allows kind of connections between various different apps and create what are called trigger points. So when this happens, do this. I managed to pair my Gmail to AI. So anytime an email came in from a specific person, it takes that email, sends it over to ChatGPT. It then filters through my ChatGPT co-parenting bot, filters out any form of toxic language, and only takes out actionable points. So it's if it says, we need to determine what time we're picking up our son, it will take out that one sentence from the whole email and then send it back to my email. I then respond to that email. It then picks up that email and responds back to the original email. And so AI is profound in its ability to support you in ways you could never imagine. And so now I'm like, man, how can we help other people that are going through these experiences where they need to read these emails because there may be actionable points in them, but they want to remove any of the toxic information. And so AI can do that. It's profound.
So you never need to read it. You just get the real deal.
You just
They
get
could
that
respond.
totally.
Yeah. So, and I really need to laugh because I needed to do that when I ended a relationship for over a year. And there was a promise I made to myself is I read through that, I ignore any kind of emotion that's coming up in me. And I'm searching for the facts. And it took a year. And this deal is like really cool, really smart idea. And it's like with that agent structures that are coming up now. I'm really into that. This is so interesting, and this will most of the people that are not into that technology are just like, yeah, I mean, it's ChatGPT. Fuck no. It's like, okay, yeah, it's ChatGPT. You can plug it into your calendar, into your Gmail. It could take calls from people, inform you about that, transform toxic content into good content, whatever. Yeah.
And
So
I
it's like,
think we will see, and we're already starting to see it in the Bitcoin space. We've seen what it's Venice AI. Venice AI is like a decentralized AI platform. And I think we're going to increasingly see open source AI. We've already seen it with what DeepSeek R1, like the cost to be able to create AI is just
yeah,
falling off a cliff. And that's
yeah,
positive because it's kind of democratizing AI. What we don't want is these kind of core AI solutions in the hands of one or two individuals. I think that will be a heavier world.
yeah. So the next word is, I think, very interesting: power.
So this is you know, I think that many times power comes from the ego. It comes from trauma.
Mhm.
And I very much believe that take UK politicians. UK politicians, most of them went to boarding schools and they were sent away outside of their control. They didn't feel loved by their parents at a very early age. They were kind of like put into these dorms with tons of other children. They didn't have their parents around. They didn't have their grandparents around. And they felt lost. They didn't feel loved. And so when they exit, as they grow up, what do? They try to resolve internal trauma through power, through the control of others, to control their environment. And so I would say that a lot of the heinous acts that we've seen throughout society, whether we're talking about Mao Zedong, whether we're talking about Stalin, these heinous acts many times are from children that did not have their emotional needs met, then tried to use power to meet their emotional needs as opposed to working on themselves internally. And so I think that in a world where people have more capacity, people don't seek power in the ways that we're seeking power today. I think there will be a very, very different world. And again, it's kind of like the Taoist or Taoist approach, which is kind of like doing by not doing. It's kind of like allowing the world to unfold as it should, working on the inner self as opposed to trying to change the external self. And so I think the power dynamic in a world built upon Bitcoin would be very different to the world we live in today.
So I would summarize: you are as good as I am in giving one sentence answers.
That was meant to be one sentence. Sorry.
Oh, good. Oh, good. This is why we're here. So let's jump into the other one. So the idea is, at the moment, I'm receiving messages from the future, back in time. So now imagine you could also send messages back in time, but not to your grandchild, but to yourself. So what kind of message would you send to your 7-year-old self?
You know what? It kind of builds on what I just mentioned, which is I very much believe the world is working for us, not to us. And I think the world unfolds exactly as it should. The situations, whether it's the relationships, the businesses, the challenges we find ourselves in, are trying to mirror back to us how we can grow as an individual and maybe reflects our shadow world or our shadow self. And I think that many times I've been frustrated or I've been upset at what is taking place in my world. And I have not looked at it from the perspective of what is this situation trying to tell me about myself right now? And so I think that if I was to kind of send a message to myself, it's rather than trying to change the world around me again, trying to wish what was happening was not true, to pass blame onto other people, it's to just take radical accountability and recognize that the world is happening to me for a reason. And it's trying to reflect something about my internal state or my inner world or my shadow self. And as I've got older, it has become increasingly prevalent as to just how powerful this type of insight has become in helping me grow as an individual. And yeah, I would pass that on to my younger self very much.
That's cool. And if we reverse time again and you send messages into the future to your own grandchild living in 2140, what would the message be?
I think it would be like, strive to kind of let go of what others think of you, and strive to be able to, and this is, hopefully we live in this ideal world where Bitcoin is base money, people have capacity, and I would say spend time in contemplation. Sometimes the inner world can be uncomfortable, and sometimes the inner world can be challenging, and we don't want to deal with it. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have alcoholism, drug use, substance abuse, because we're trying to suppress those feelings. But I think that those feelings are coming up for a reason. It is a red flag. And to listen to that red flag, spend time in contemplation, thinking about what is it, this message that's trying to say to you. So it's, in doing so, spending time in contemplation, I think we develop our intuition and we develop our gut. And to me, that is how we create real change, is coming from more of an energetic, gut intuitive space as opposed to a cognitive space. I think the world we live in today, we spend so much time, because we've got so much external stimulus, whether it's from the screens we're using, the technology we're using. We've got so much external stimulus. We spend a lot of time in the cognitive space. We've lost touch with our intuitive gut space. And I think contemplation allows that space to arise again.
Couldn't agree more. And now there's a special thing. You could, if you want to, also send a message to my grandchild, to June. And by the time this episode is published, her answer will be included in the episode. So just imagine, what would you ask her? You got to know her a little bit from the transmission. So I think she's kind of capable of giving like very complex answers. So what would it be?
I would say that as much as on an individual level, we believe we know what is right and what we need to do to create change, unfortunately, the world is so complex. It is such a complex adaptive system that we can't fathom the unintended consequences of trying to create change. And the same is true on a monetary level, as we've discussed throughout this. I think that we may have a leader that believes, you know what, we've been operating on Bitcoin, but I have some ideas on how we can improve Bitcoin. Let's move over to this centralized money. And so with that in mind, I would say never let money become corrupted again. Never let it centralize. And so optimize for a decentralized, scarce, trustless, and permissionless money at all costs. Make sure that we do not centralize, because although, yes, there may be an individual that has an idea about how it can create a better Bitcoin that is centralized. And yes, maybe there may be a period of time, a few years, where you have a little bit of growth. But I would argue that growth is artificial, and all you need is for the next leader to come into power, for all of that growth to vanish in a heartbeat. And so the challenges we've faced up until now, we've not had the ability to distribute and decentralize money. And I think that this world in 2140 is going to be built upon a decentralized money. So how do we optimize for ensuring it stays that way?
That would be your question. How to optimize, help us optimizing for decentralizing the monetary system.
Yep.
Okay. I'm excited. Seb, it's been like 2 hours now. We had a quite long pre-talk, but it's like, I think it was an amazing recording, and I thank you very much for your time. How can people reach you? Is it like on X or?
Yeah, people can find me on X, which is just Seb Bunney, and Bunny is Bunney. I do have a website, Seb Bunney, which I kind of post a lot of my talks. I'll post this talk when it comes up live. And I do discuss many of the topics we discuss. It's called, I have a blog called The Chi of Self-Sovereignty, the energy of how we'll become more sovereign individuals. I don't post on there too often because I like to write when I feel motivated to write, as opposed to pushing out something on a regular frequency. And again, the last thing I'll mention is like, I have a book called The Hidden Cost of Money, dives into all of the repercussions of kind of broken money and what a world under a Bitcoin standard might look like. I never want price to be a barrier to someone's learning. And so if someone listens to this issue or this podcast and enjoys it, but doesn't have the financial ability to purchase the book, reach out to me on Twitter, on my website, and I'll happily send you the ebook for free. I just want people to access this material more than anything, because I think the future is bright and we can get to that place that we've just discussed.
That's an awesome last word. I would say thank you very much. And I will hopefully talk to you again in another episode.
Thanks a lot, Patrick.
I really
Honestly,
enjoyed it.
Such a pleasure. And I really appreciate what you're doing. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks.
Hi, Seb. I've been thinking about your question. How do we optimize to ensure that money like Bitcoin stays decentralized and never becomes corrupted again? Here in Nodea, we've learned it takes 5 things. First, a clean separation of money and state, so no one can manipulate the system. Second, solid tech foundations, proof of work, a fixed supply, and no shortcuts. Third, a culture that reveres sovereignty, because decentralization has to live in people's hearts, not just in the protocol. Fourth, lifelong education, so no one grows up believing freedom is someone else's job. And fifth, local regenerative governance, because power only centralizes when it drifts too far from home. But really, it all comes down to personal development. If people don't evolve, the system won't hold. It starts way deeper than code. What preserves decentralization isn't just tech, it's the culture around it, the daily habits, the shared values, and the stories people tell about what freedom actually means. In Nodea, we don't just use Bitcoin. We live inside a system that teaches kids from age 7 how to track their emotional coherence, how to make decisions together, how to understand value not as price, but as aligned contribution. That's what keeps the money honest. It's not just math, it's maturity. Because the truth is, you can't hold decentralized money if you're not developing decentralized thinking. If you're still outsourcing your authority, waiting for someone else to fix it, still seeking leaders to follow, that's the real risk. Not code, but people. So for me, the answer is this. We protect decentralized money by growing decentralized people. People who can hold complexity without control, who choose transparency over comfort, who live as if integrity is the only real wealth. This question deserves an entire episode of its own. I hope this gives you a place to start, Seb. Integrity is the new infrastructure. Talk soon.